Okay, so thank you so much for joining us for this virtual event. It is too bad, unfortunately, we're still not meeting in person right now, but I'm really excited to have this event with Nigel Poor of the San Quentin Project, which is the new book that she came out with, as well as of the podcast Ear Hustle. And we're actually going to be joined by a co host and co creator, Earlonne Woods, which I'm really excited about. Just some housekeeping. So, yes, so this is a Zoom webinar. Your cameras and mics are not on. We are recording it, so it'll be available to view later for a little bit. And as usual, we want to thank the foundation for making programs like this possible. And normally we would do a little bit of an introduction, but I think Nigel and Earlonne will probably be best at introducing themselves a little bit. So if I could invite them onto the screen, I'll go ahead and get them started here. And yay! You can join me in welcoming both of them. And I'm so excited and honored to have you both here today. And some of you may know we had Nigel pour at the library in 2018, and it was just really wonderful. And now to be joined by Earlonne's definitely just like a real pleasure. So thanks so much for joining us. So to start, I guess if I could ask you both to kind of introduce yourselves and what your relationship is to San Quentin.
Earlonne, you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first?
Well, my name is Earlonne Woods. I'm the co-host and co-creator of the podcast Ear Hustle. And my relation with San Quentin is I was actually housed inside San Quentin when I met the illustrious Nigel Poor.
Yeah.
All right, go to you, Nigel.
Okay. In 2011, I started volunteering at San Quentin through the Prison University Project, teaching a history of photography class. Did that for about 3 semesters and got really interested in the prison. And from there, I started volunteering in the media lab, which is where I met Earlonne Woods. And at that time, we were working on a radio project together. We worked on that for quite a few years. And then in 2015, we came up with the idea of starting the podcast Ear Hustle, which launched in 2016. So that's how I got to San Quentin, and that's how we met.
Awesome. And actually, I should have asked this first. How have you all been, especially with the pandemic? And Earlonne, obviously, you came, you were released, and then ended up in a shelter-in-place order. So, wanted to see how y'all have been doing the past couple years.
Well, I can say for me, the last couple of years has been the most beautifulest years, even through COVID. There has been a shiny sun in my life. You know what I'm saying? So even though it's dark, COVID is shut things down for me. It has been a great, I don't want to even say a great experience. I just want to say life has been beautiful these last couple of years, because the 30th of this month will be 3 years that I've been home free. So I'm just loving every moment of it.
Gratitude. Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, it's been a mixed bag. We've been really fortunate to be able to continue working on the podcast. Earlonne and I wrote a book during COVID that just came out 2 weeks ago called This is Ear Hustle. It was published by Penguin, which was very exciting. I think the hard part was that we weren't able to go into the prison to work for about 16 months. And so I really missed our inside colleagues, and that was really hard. And people in prison really suffered during COVID. As much as people suffered out here, people were really having a hard time inside, being isolated, shut down. So it was bittersweet. But I'm happy for the successes that Earlonne and I had during COVID, and that we were able to push forward and keep working. So
I didn't realize y'all wrote the book during COVID entirely.
Totally, yeah. We started, I don't remember exactly when we started, but it was our COVID project.
There was nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Outside of episodes.
Yeah.
And Nigel, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the photography course, which your book, you know, kind of covers or talks about a little bit, and the mapping
Sure.
that occurs.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a project I worked on before Ear Hustle. I started it in 2011. I got access to a really amazing archive of negatives taken at San Quentin between like the late 1940s to about mid 1980s. They were taken by correctional officers, and they kind of document every aspect of life inside prison. And so originally I was working with it, trying to archive them and organize them. And then it occurred to me that it would be much more interesting to try to work on a collaborative project with the men inside. So I got permission to bring them into the prison. I worked with a small group of men, about 12 guys. Earlonne was actually one of them. Although unfortunately his work didn't make it into the book, which I can't really explain why. But it didn't affect our friendship or our professional relationship. And so I would bring them into the prison and talk about it with this group of men. We talked about all the principles of photography, how to look at photographs, how to think about them. And then the guys would take them back to their housing unit and write about them and map them, as I called it. So they would look at them and kind of illustrate and mark all the things that they noticed that were interesting, and then use those markings to create narratives about what was happening in the photograph. And by doing that, they were really able to explain to the outside viewer what is happening in the photographs, because obviously people who are living that experience know way more than people who are just dropping in and spending time in a prison. And so it tamed the photographs in a way. It anchored them and it brought them to life, and it allowed the guys who are participating to get their own versions of the photographs and their own stories out into the world.
Yeah, and looking at them, so I was reading through them and reading all the stories that they then told, and the details that they note are really interesting, right? Like they're definitely coming from a
Yeah.
different background than like I am, and they're noticing like, oh, what is that machinery like, or what is that background
Mhm.
like? And I was wondering, I think you kind of give a little bit of this in the book, but if you could kind of tell us what type of instruction you gave them, in terms of
Yeah.
how were they going to evaluate the photos?
Yeah, so we started talking about photographic principles like focus, framing, depth of field, um, how you set up an image, what's in the foreground, what's in the background. But it was, so that was like the technical part. But then what we really talked about was just the importance of observation and looking at detail and like embracing the fact that you bring your own life experience to understanding a photograph. So that's what we talked about. And I really encouraged guys to go into their own experience and their own memory and try to explain the photograph from that perspective. I mean, I believe that the photograph is a very accessible art medium because we can place ourselves within the photograph in some ways easier than we can inside of a painting or a sculpture. So that's how I talked about it. I try to talk about photography as a generous medium that invites the viewer in, and that added invitation is added when people write about the photograph. So first you have the photograph inviting you in, and then you have the participant, say it was Earlonne writing about it, inviting you into his understanding of the photograph. So that's how I talked about it, as something that anybody can do, whether they have experience with art or photography or not. They just have to access their own experience. So that was the idea behind it.
Awesome. And I mean, the writing is really beautiful in the way they write about the photographs, and I think actually felt much more insightful than I feel like I would, you know, the much more insightful than I would be looking at those photos. And was this the first
Well,
time that you and Earlonne met? Sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. So Earlonne and I met in 2012.
Okay.
I think it was 2012. And I'd been teaching at the Prison University Project and working on this a little bit. And in 2012, Earlonne and I were working on a radio project together. So we knew each other. We didn't know each other that well, but he was also really busy with the radio project that we were working on. And he's also very interested in film. So he had his own stuff going on. But we were aware of each other and we were getting to know each other at that point. But when I was teaching that class, and I call it a class because it was more of an informal gathering, a lot of the people that ended up being part of that kind of workshop were guys that I had met while I was teaching for the Prison University Project, and Earlonne was not in there. So I think in some ways that's maybe why he wasn't included. I don't know, Earlonne, sorry.
You
Luckily, he
mean
doesn't hold the grudge.
included in the class that was in the media center?
Yeah.
Well, the class was filled up before the class even came out, so I missed. I was too late. People really didn't, wanted to be a part of the class, and so, when I found out about it, I was probably filming them doing the class.
Exactly. You did actually film us doing the class, because the idea was we were going to try to make a film out of it. So Earlonne was doing that. So he was kind of behind the scenes with it. But it was definitely the precursor to Ear Hustle and the work Earlonne and I eventually did together, because it was all about storytelling, which is what Ear Hustle is about, obviously.
Yeah. So Earlonne, did you also do the photo mapping or no?
Well, no, I wasn't fortunate enough to be in the class. I didn't make it into the book, but I did a photo mapping. I did a few.
You did at least two that I
did
remember.
two. I did one about a 1974 San Quentin football team, and they used to use pads and they tackle football. I was just thinking about how in today's time they don't allow you to do tackle football. It's only like flag football.
Yeah, and they had full on like the whole thing, right?
Contact,
they looked like a professional team.
Yeah, the shoulder pads, all the pads, the helmet, they was really playing.
Yeah.
By the time I got there, it was just like, oh, give me the flag, no touching. But I also did one about, it was like a knife, a picture of a knife. But again, those weren't as, I guess it didn't have a bang to it, so it didn't make it nowhere. So I'm on the cutting room floor. I've been edited out.
You know what? I still have them. I gotta find them.
I respect the edited out game. I understand it now. I can't be offended by it. I know, you have to kill your darlings.
Just imagine if you signed them, how valuable they would be now.
Right? Yeah. You should sign them. And are the ones that they mapped, are these mapped ones now also in the archives?
Yeah. Do you want to show an image so people know what we're talking about?
Yeah. And I was like, I remember there's a knife photo in here, and I remember a football team photo.
Yeah, they're in the book. They're not in the PowerPoint that I sent you. Okay. But they are in the book. Does the library have a copy of the book?
Yes, I happen to be here, right?
Okay.
Of this one, and then we did order that this is Ear Hustle as well. Yeah, of course.
What were you thinking, Earlonne?
No, I believe I was writing on my football picture what our first episode of season 8 was.
What?
Because I was wondering how they were just kicked back in 1974 when everything that had occurred in 1971 with George Jack.
Wow.
I know I had wrote that on there, like, how are they back on it? Yeah, that's the picture.
Is that it?
Not the one that I wrote on, but that's the picture, exactly.
God, Earlonne, I'm gonna go find that picture. I know where it is. I have to look at it. If you wrote that, that's pretty amazing. He's talking about, we did a story for Ear Hustle about George Jackson, and we can talk about that in a minute. Mm-hmm. So, wow. So this is an image of just the archive, so people can get an idea of what I was dealing with. But can you go to slide number 3?
That one?
Yeah, and so I always like to show these two because it's a really good example of the archive image without being mapped, and then what it looks like when it's being mapped. So this was done by one of the students, and now a guy I consider my friend, Ruben Ramirez, he's out of San Quentin right now. So he got this photograph, which is of a stabbing, as it says on the negative, which is, it's pretty hard to look at. It's pretty upsetting. And then if you go to the next slide, this is the image after it's been mapped. So again, what I love about the writing is that it transforms the image from something that seems sterile and unnerving to something that draws you in and you want to look closer and find all the details in it. And this is a really beautiful example of that. So when Ruben was writing about this, he was writing about it in terms of architecture. So he looks at this man who's been stabbed, and I can't tell if he's alive or not. But he says he calls the man a once proud cathedral, a fallen cathedral that's being buttressed by two hands, one hand of kind of like hope and determination, and another hand that's trying to pull him back into a life he doesn't want to be in. So it's just so wonderful that he thought about this in these poetic terms and talking about architecture. I would never have thought about that looking at the image. And so again, my feelings were that every time one of the guys wrote about the photograph, they not only claim it and they make it more expansive and make me look at it in a different way. And hopefully other viewers look at it in a different way and see things that we wouldn't see without their help. So I think this I always think is a really good example of why I wanted to do the writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was almost surprised just how much was pointed out in the details that I never would have noticed or thought about. Or I felt like my eyesight was bad too. Like they would point out a person and be like, "Is there a person there?" Like,
oh, yeah, yeah.
Is the person alive?
Is he alive? Earlonne, what do you think? Is he?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they would be holding him up if he was.
I know, it's really.
That seemed really intrusive.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of sort of might be. I don't know.
There's other pictures in the sequence, and honest to God, I cannot tell if he's alive or not. And you know, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's one of the things about the archive. There's a lot of mysteries about it that just can't be answered. There's no one around to tell us what was happening in these pictures. And this is 1963, so that's almost 60 years old.
Right. And is there documentation, like if you really wanted to, would there be documentation of, say, this is stabbing happened on this day that you would
no. So the documentation is some of the negatives actually have this writing on it, which that's why I know the date. And if you go back to slide number 1.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so this is the condition I got them in. They were just in these, actually I organized it. They were just all thrown in there, just a pile of negatives in these sleeves. And that's the only documentation that's on there. So there's no other like master book to go to say, what does this mean? The notebooks that you see in there were used by COs, and they have dates and they have notes in there, but it's pretty obscure what they're saying. Yeah, there's not like there's a master document somewhere. So part of the archive project was trying to parse it out and make sense of it, knowing that the questions are just never going to be completely answered to anyone's satisfaction. You've got to live with the unknowing.
And so are there still, I guess, you know, what's the difference now in terms of photos? Like, are there still these photographs taken that are archived somewhere? Is it all digital? Is it?
Well, I'd actually love to hear what Earlonne, how do they deal with taking photographs? And so these were taken usually for fights and violent things, but also there's really beautiful photographs of weddings and, you know, school, family visits, people eating. But what do they do now inside, Earlonne? Or when you were inside, how did they do that?
So I don't even think there's a thing anymore. Well, let me take that back. You know, it all depends. I assume this was for what turned out to be later ISU, Institutional Security Unit. Currently, I know they do take pictures, but usually they're of whenever there's a crime scene. You know, someone was stabbed or someone was assaulted or something to that effect. Whether they do it like this anymore, I don't know, but they do still take pictures.
But it's weird, like they're using 4. Can you go to slide number?
Come on now, Nigel, this is the 60s.
Yeah, it is the 60s. It's definitely the 60s. Can you go to slide number 5? So I think, you know, what Earlonne is saying, I think you really see this in the slides. So at this time, they were taking pictures of everything. Yeah, so go back one to the cover. Oh. So like, here's a picture of 2 guys playing tennis. You wouldn't even necessarily know this was in prison. And they were walking around these 4x5 cameras, these large format cameras. They're not digital, they're not point and shoot cameras. So they're very intentional. And can we just go through these to show people the breadth of images?
Yeah.
And so you've got things like this playing baseball. Here's an example. Like here's a guy in a baseball uniform. Again, you wouldn't know necessarily that he was in prison unless you happen to know that yard. The next one. This is a powwow that happened inside the prison. So, you know, a lot of these are not necessarily violent events. And I am really curious. I don't see correctional officers walking around with cameras. Lieutenant Robinson, who's a public information officer, sometimes walks around with a camera when there's visitors, but I don't know if there's an equation to what happens now. The next one, picture of visitors putting together Christmas boxes to bring to guys in their cells, and that one that's been mapped. The next one is, yeah, we can just quickly go through these. So here's like a Christmas tree. And Earlonne, you can't even tell in this one if this guy's incarcerated or he works there, because at this point people didn't wear uniforms.
Nor did they would have to wear like some type of prison uniform.
Yeah,
either.
exactly. Nothing identifies them. Now, guys, they still wear uniforms that say CDCR, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, down the side. Yeah. And I think there's one more. Or that might be the last one. Oh yeah. So this is the only image I found that suggests who was taking the pictures. So the one on the left as we're looking at it. There's a correctional officer. I assume the other guys in there are incarcerated men, but I don't really know. And then the one on the right as we're looking at it is more the one about evidence. So the CO is pointing to a circle that I think has a drop of blood in it. So in the book, just like the podcast, like I intentionally wanted to have all kinds of images, not just images that were easily recognizable as prison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. And that's interesting too, the clothing, because I think that's not something I thought of before, that they didn't have standardized uniforms or standardized clothing.
Oh yeah. I mean, Earlonne can probably speak to this, but I was talking to this guy yesterday inside for our story that we're working on. He was talking about how he was there in the 70s, and he said he used to have like silk t-shirts that he would wear, Stacey Adams on his feet. Like,
you know, it's a trip because certain prisons, it took a long time for them to clear all that out, because they had this thing called the grandfather rule, where if you had it, you had it, you know, as far as all the new prisoners, you couldn't attain certain clothing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it just got to that, okay, we want everybody to be labeled, so they start writing CDCR prisoner type stuff on the clothing. But back then, those guys used to be styling. I mean, I was in prison when you used to have your own clothing, but then it came to a point where they just wanted everybody to be in state clothing.
Mm-hmm.
But that was definitely, I mean, you feel a lot better when you in your own threads.
oh my God, definitely.
The circumstances are drab, but
What was the best thing you wore? Do you remember?
I remember I was in the youth authority. I had a silk shirt, some like silk type of corduroy, some suede shoes. So when I used to go out to visiting, I used to look like I was going to the club. You know,
Isn't it hard to imagine now?
Like, I have pictures of that, of me going out there in silk shirts and you know, because it's like you see your family and you want your family to see you how they normally known to see you, you know? So,
yeah.
you know, that's how I used to walk out there. But for everybody else, used to be like, oh man, because some dudes used to come out there with khakis on, and you know, that's how they family seen them, you know, in gang attire.
Yeah.
Me, they seen me more in some cool stuff. So
well, you do love clothes.
Love clothes.
And were there
That's one thing we have in common.
Not more than Nigel poor.
We do love our clothes.
Nowhere near her.
I don't know about that. We've got different style, but we both do like
her name. Her nickname is Miss Fluvog.
Miss Fluvog.
Well, you are like always styling when I've seen the photos from your events. You both are very styling for sure.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
I highly appreciate it. You know,
Yeah.
I got a little twist. I got a little something that I use for that.
Yeah, well, right now, Earlonne is wearing a hoodie that he actually designed.
Oh no, definitely. I did
that.
design this. This is like I do in my outside of ear hustle life, I have an organization called Choose One, which stands for Could Hip Hop Overthrow Oppressive Sentencing Enactments? And This is one of the hoodies that we sell to try to get funding to repeal California three strikes law. So
Oh,
that's my
awesome.
that's my side hustle.
Yeah, which if you could share, I don't know if there's a way to share a link to the website.
Yes, I think
Just,
you might be able to. Let me see. Yeah, you
just, do
should
you want
be
to talk
able,
about that a little
or
bit?
I can.
I don't know how to share it, but
Yeah, maybe
I
I
can
you
do
could
it.
always post it, but there's a lot of
put it
stuff
in,
going on
I
right
can
now,
always
which is
put it
really
in the chat,
interesting.
and then somebody can take it from the chat.
Yeah, you can just put it in the chat if you'd like.
O-R-G. Yeah, and I mean, I think so. What I'm trying to do right now is, I was sentenced under California three strikes law, and had it been just for the law itself, I'll still be in San Quentin or some prison in California until November of 2028, which was my first board appearance. Had not Governor Jerry Brown stepped in and was like, you know what, I think you need to be free, so I'm gonna commute your sentence. So, some of the work that I'm doing right now is I'm single-handedly not a governor, but I'm trying to commute everybody's sentence. There's 40,000 people that's sentenced under California three strikes, be it a second strike with a doubled up sentence or a third strike with a life sentence. There's 7,000 people with a third strike, and then there's 33,000 with a second strike. So my mission with Choose One and Repeal California Three Strikes Law Coalition is to repeal the law, or at least put it on the ballot and put it back in front of the people and see how the people vote. See, do the people want it in, or do they want it out? People did vote it in 1994. I think times have changed. One of my main missions is to see that, I know it's a far stretch, but I want to see teachers in our public schools being paid as much as correctional officers. That's my mission.
I'm for
Yeah,
that, man.
Definitely for that.
Yeah.
for sure. Um, and oh gosh, I just had a thought and it went.
Oh, it ain't just me. It's not just me with the thoughts that just come
It's
and
all
go.
the time,
Oh,
and it's always when I'm on camera being recorded.
and I highly appreciate that, because I've been thinking it's been all bad. It's the end. My memory finna just elapse on me. Thank you. I appreciate
No,
that.
this
You give me
happens to
hope.
me too much, probably. Actually, maybe I should be concerned. Um, let's see. Okay, so before I'll hopefully remember that thought in a moment. I was curious though, looking at the photos, how similar, different y'all find the environments um, in comparison to today.
Oh, what do you think, Earlonne? Do they seem recognizable?
Not necessarily. No, no. Because I mean, I used to look at certain videos and certain stuff that came out, and you would think that you would probably the first person that walked on that landscape, as opposed to it's been people walking on that same landscape for 30, 40, 50, 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So I think it's totally different, because remember, there was a thing in those pictures called Blood Alley.
Mm,
There's no more Blood Alley because they built that big hospital. You
right.
know what I'm saying? So it's things have changed a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know what the population was back then, but there's, how many guys are at San Quentin now? There were, at the
1,000.
height, there were 4,000. During COVID, it went down by like 1,200 people. But it was built as for a single cell institution, and now it's doubled up. So the population has certainly grown substantially since a lot of those pictures were taken. Yeah. And in fact, the place where we work in the media lab at San Quentin used to be the laundry facility. And I remember that because we used to hear all the clanging of the old pipes in there, which doesn't happen anymore. But we were interviewing a guy on Monday, and he had been in San Quentin in the 70s, and he was like, "Yeah, when I was here in the 70s, I worked down here, and this was the laundry room." So now it's the media lab. Now it's full of computers.
That's
Yeah, different
and I mean, it
purpose.
seems. I mean, I was like, it almost seems a shame that there maybe aren't pictures capturing just day to day, but does it almost seem like those are more the projects that some of y'all are doing? Like you were doing a documentary, y'all are doing Ear Hustle. Is it almost like individuals inside are actually maybe documenting through projects, or is there just
I'm not
less?
quite sure what you mean.
Is it like do the individuals inside get to, document things as part of like a media project at all, or is it really almost like
Not
there's just
anybody, no.
very
No, no,
little
no.
documentation?
You mean now? Are you talking about
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
No, nobody can just walk around with a camera. No, it's prison. No. So
But
no,
it almost seems a
no,
shame
there,
though to not be able to have that in a way, to have
well,
that.
yeah, it would be great. I mean, there is a media lab at San Quentin, but
Yeah.
you have to, guys, I mean, some guys can go out, but no, you have to go out, you have to be supervised, either Lieutenant Robinson or someone who works for the media lab. I mean, it took us a long time. We now can go out to the yard with a microphone
Mhm.
and record people without being escorted, but that took years to
Mm,
do.
yeah.
And I mean, Earlonne can speak to this. Other prisons, I mean, this couldn't even happen at other prisons, right? I mean, can you imagine Earlonne at some other prisons that guys are walking around the yard with a movie
No,
camera?
that's a San Quentin type of thing. That's honestly. So I believe we talk about it in the book, and I'm sorry I'm saying I believe, but
That memory thing.
that's what got me to San Quentin. I was watching a show on the Discovery Channel where guys were doing exactly that, walking around the institution with cameras, though they were escorted by Lieutenant Robinson and all. But that I saw that this prison had a film school, which I thought was a repetitive thing, but it was only once, and that's what sparked my interest and wanted me to go to San Quentin because I was interested in film. So instead of learning like auto body, auto paint, San Quentin was a level 2 prison, which I was level 2, and I was like, okay, I need to get there, and that's how I ended up getting to San Quentin. And the film thing was cool, didn't work out as planned. They were already gone, but I was still able to go there and learn how to do film, learn how to do videos, learn how to edit them, learn how to put them out. And that's how Nigel and I originally met in 2012.
Yeah. And that film school, which I think was done by the Discovery
It was
Channel.
done by the Discovery Channel and a few film producers.
Yeah, and they left their equipment after they did the film school. They left the equipment there, and that's kind of my understanding, Earlonne, is that's what started the media lab. Is that right?
No, that's
No.
not what started the media lab. I would leave that's a Lonnie Morris conversation. Because he was there he was videoing back in the 80s with VHS.
Oh, wow.
And so there has been a media center there.
Okay.
I don't know how big it was, but there was a media center there in the 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to San Quentin has a really long history of media. The San Quentin News, I think it's been published inside San Quentin since the 20s.
I think so. Well, I mean, at least since Warden Duffy was
Warden Duffy, and that's in
the 40s.
40s. Warden Duffy was actually a really interesting warden and a progressive warden in the 40s at San Quentin. He actually started the first radio show inside the prison, and he had radio, I don't know if receivers, I don't know what you call them, radios installed in all of the cells so guys could hear outside stories. And then he actually produced music to be played inside the prison. He tried to get outside radio stations to play their programs, which he didn't have much success with. But in some ways, he was like the first podcaster inside the prison. It was called the Gray Network.
Funny. And I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of like actual, like a prison is actually offering rehabilitation programs, San Quentin seems to have quite a bit.
Yeah.
Could you, I can't remember what the number is, but I'm also curious, since you're mentioning that like in the 40s they started a radio station, did they also, like, has it always been that model, or does it feel like only more recently there have been more programs?
Well, I'm gonna say this. This is what I'm gonna say. Every prison should,
Yes.
mandatory, I mean, by definition, be like San Quentin, because San Quentin offers individuals programs, be it self-help, be it video, be it audio, whatever. And I think all prisons should offer individuals like that, those type of programs, because that helps individual in their transformation, that help individuals in their rehabilitation, that helps individuals do something different, you know.
Yeah. But no, it's gone through periods. San Quentin's gone through all different periods. There was a point where it was a maximum security prison. It was a really violent place in the 70s and 80s, Earlonne?
Yeah, and then
Very
Lonnie
different.
Morris still had a camera in that joint
Yeah,
too.
well, Lonnie Morris is an unusual guy. He was incarcerated at San Quentin for 45 years. He just got out 44 years. Did he get out just like 3
He
months
got
ago?
out about 7-8 months ago.
7 or 8 months ago. Anyway, he's the oracle of San Quentin. If you want to have a question about San Quentin, he can answer it. But now San Quentin is a medium security prison, even though it still has death row. And because it's in the Bay Area, there's a lot of volunteers that go in and out that create a lot of programming inside. And I think that's one of the reasons San Quentin is the like flagship prison of rehabilitation. But a lot of prisons in California are in completely isolated places where there's just not people going in to do volunteer work. And so they don't have the kind of programming that San Quentin has, unfortunately. And what Earlonne's saying is right. I mean, these programs should be in all prisons, but it's tough. I mean, if volunteers don't go in and do it, it means the state has to pay for it.
And that's not part of the budget. I mean, even though they do have an R on it for rehabilitation, when you talk about, and I'll say this again and again and again, I always tell Nigel this, that volunteers are on the front line of public safety. Because when you just have corrections, you just have correctional officers whose directive is to try to correct something. I don't know what that is, but they're there to be custodians. They're not there to be rehabilitative counselors or psychologists to figure out, what has gone wrong in someone's life or something like that.
Yeah.
So I would say that, the volunteers, the people that come in on their own time to assist in whatever program it is definitely a healing moment, and it's definitely what a lot of other prisons need. But the prisons in California are all in like isolated areas where, going to them might be 3-4 hours. You know what I'm saying? And people don't have that luxury. Everybody don't have that luxury, especially when you're dealing with college kids that usually are, going inside the prisons and assisting.
Yeah.
So, you have, these prisons be in Eureka somewhere and everybody else is, somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and then I think the private prisons add like a different level to that too.
Private prisons are hustles though. That's like,
no, it's
it's a cold. Private prisons is a cold hustle.
Yeah,
truly.
And it kind of takes me into one thing I wanted to mention or ask about, which is so like the way when I listen to you both, it's like there's some type of magic really that happens. I think part of it is like you both have very like soothing, lovely voices, but you're also, very mindful in your interviews. There's like light and laughter, and then there's also the serious and more difficult conversations. I feel like kind of over time you all have started to cover more and more concerns that maybe might be like harder for the prison to such as kind of talking about like what incarcerated individuals are paid for their labor. Although I noticed that y'all might just say, hey, it's this much, and not like, hey, this is a legalized form of slave labor. Which is, something that is in my mind. And also covering more on, relationship with police, relationship with COs. So I'm kind of curious, how has that been? Was it difficult to move into covering these topics, or is it kind of what you are hoping to do more and more of?
I can answer this, and I can say there's no topic that Ear Hustle would not touch. There's no topic that we're scared to touch. The biggest topic in San Quentin that everyone's scared to even think about, not touch, but think about. They're scared that their thoughts would be, somehow listened to, was the first episode of season 8, which is August 21st, 1971. That if you speak George Jackson's name, you have the chances of going to solitary confinement.
Yeah.
You have the chances of having everything disrupted just by reading one of this guy's books. And that's the story that we covered. And that was the episode that we wanted to do for a long time, because there's been so much drama behind this one person that we wanted to explore that. So there's nothing that Ear Hustle won't take on, with the exceptions of conversations like, how do cell phones get into prisons? How do knives get made? How do, stuff like that we're not interested in, because that's what the media do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's not what how do I say, that's not what something our fancies.
Yeah, it's not our lane. I mean, we should, for people who don't know who George Jackson was, he was a political, many people called him a political prisoner. He was incarcerated in San Quentin in the 70s. He was killed by correctional officers, and why he was killed and how it happened has never been made clear, and it's controversial to this day. As Earlonne said, you bring up his name inside San Quentin, incarcerated guys, people who work there do not want to talk about him. It holds so much power over people. And yeah, we wanted to do this story from the beginning, but we had a really hard time finding people to talk to us about it. And we worked on it for a long time. It was a very intense way to start the season. I'm really proud of that episode, because I think we brought the history to life. And what we do with all of our stories is we never tell people what to think. We give people all the ingredients they need to make up their own minds. I think maybe in this episode, we tipped our hand a little bit about what we think, but we really we talked to correctional officers, we talked to guys that had been incarcerated there at the time, we talked to like a guy in his 20s who's at San Quentin now. So we tried to get it from all areas and make it clear that, okay, you're hearing all sides now as a listener, what do you think happened? And we try to do that with all of our stories. So we're not muckrakers. We would never say on a story, this is modern day slavery, but we're going to give you all the information to probably come to that conclusion on your own.
Yeah, I mean, and George Jackson, like I say, I was just watching on social media, there's a movie coming out called Attica, and it's going to talk about the Attica Rebellion, and a lot of that was behind the murder of George Jackson, So, I mean, I think with Ear Hustle, we're able to talk about a lot of topics, that probably the average media people wouldn't talk about, or won't talk about, or don't talk about. Yeah. So I think I wouldn't say that, I won't say that we're censored by any means on what stories we do. I think we censor ourselves on, what works and what don't work.
Yeah. And, we've worked really hard to get the trust and the respect of the administration, not just the trust, but the respect of the administration. And, I mean, I also have gratitude to Lieutenant Robinson and to San Quentin for letting us do what we do. Wasn't easy, and they didn't have to let us do it at all. And so I think there's a two-way respect.
And my gratitude is kind of wavering right now, because Lieutenant Robinson ain't called me back.
Oh boy, yeah, this is what we got to work on tonight. Is we've got an episode coming out tomorrow that we have not gotten approved yet, so it's a little bit of a nail biter. It's gonna be a late night.
I've been over here on him.
Oh Lord.
And I guess, that was part of the question too, is like, do they have any idea, before you start a story, what you're working on? Do they have to okay it?
No, but I mean, I think out of camaraderie and out of just, respect for the situation, usually in the beginning of the season or at the end of the previous seasons, we will go inside San Quentin, sit down with our colleagues in there, and we would script out or talk about what the following season will look like. And then we'll throw a gang of ideas on the board. And sometimes we have Lieutenant Robinson sitting there with us, just to get his input on certain things, but just, as a, team effort, we try to sit there and come up with what our seasons our stories for the following season to be, even though they all might not make it, but we do sit there in the beginning and we do hash out what episodes we want to carry out.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt Lieutenant Robinson is part of the Ear Hustle team. You know, I mean, like we could not do it without him. He's really supportive. And there's, you know, there are some stories that when I know we're doing one that's going to be more controversial, I'll definitely give him a heads up. Like he knew for a long time we were doing the story about George Jackson for sure. He helped us find COs to talk to because we couldn't get any correctional officers to talk to us.
Yeah.
He helped us get an interview with a former warden. He was helping us get an interview with one of the COs who actually showed up with a gun, right? But remember that guy, the guy who
and that's the guy that passed away before we was able to talk to him. He passed away during COVID. But I think, yeah, we definitely opened the door. And the craziest part about our biggest challenge, we can talk to 100 incarcerated individuals and probably only one correctional officer.
That's
because
the hardest.
Correctional officers do not want to talk. At all. They don't want to be the outcast. They don't want to be the person that's talking. They don't want to be, you know, they just be like, oh, go to talk to Lieutenant Robinson. You know, that's his position. That's his, he's the talk.
Earlonne, the funny thing is a lot of them will talk to us without a mic.
Yeah, oh no.
And we'll
I'll talk without a mic. As soon as you pull that mic out, it's like.
That's exactly what happened. Nope. It's
and
amazing.
Is that like
which is bad because, you know, I mean, you know, correctional officers, and this is the crazy part. Like, I don't just want to talk about just regular stuff. I mean, you know, you got correctional officers that are heroic. You got correctional officers that are criminals. You got correctional officers that are into all kind of stuff. And we would love to cover those stories, but they don't talk.
Oh, we've had a few, maybe like three correctional officers.
Even the retired correctional officers don't want to talk.
Oh.
Wow.
What is it?
Yeah, definitely. There's a code there. There's a code.
Yeah, if there's any correctional officers out there, we want to talk to you.
Please,
you can be
reach
anonymous.
out. No matter if the story's good or bad, we'll flesh something out of it.
And it's like you're not sure if it's like a peer or, you know, just like you said, a code versus like, oh, I'm scared I'm gonna lose my job or.
No, it's not even losing the job. I think is, you know, I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna just say it how it is. You know, in prison you have gangs. In corrections you have gangs. And I think you don't want to say something outside the lines of either you're a prisoner lover, or you just not following whatever the code is. I don't know. I've never been a correctional officer, so you know, I don't know. I'm out the loop here.
Yeah, and I mean, I also want to add to this. I've met some amazing people that are correctional officers, thoughtful, caring, smart, like that really challenge the assumptions I had going in. And I've also met correctional officers that are like, you know, it's just like any population. There's going to be all kinds of people who are in that position, just like there's all kinds of people in prison. So I try not to judge all. I don't judge all correctional officers as one type of person. That would be really unfair. So, yeah.
And then I'm curious too. At this point, you know, how do you all find who to talk to about stories, or are people coming to you?
Well, I mean, we still, you know, go out and do us, you know, because we are looking for certain things that we probably all came together with and put our heads down. Like this should be a good topic or a good idea. But of course, people are always going to come and think in any field and tell you their life stories.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you're going to have that.
It's definitely gotten easier. We get contacted by a lot of people who want to tell us their stories or by other organizations. Yeah, I mean, even at the beginning, it wasn't that hard. It took a little more effort to get people, but now that we're doing stories inside and out, yeah, we have a pretty good list of people we want to talk to. It's always been easier to get people on the inside to talk to us because I don't know how else to say it. They're in one place. So scheduling is pretty damn easy. You know, we don't have to travel.
Anybody going nowhere.
Yeah, like we've, you know, like we're not going to have anybody inside not show up or call us at the last minute and say, sorry, I can't get there. It just doesn't happen. And that does happen on the outside. And, you know, sometimes we were just in I keep saying Southern California. We were just in mid-California for a couple of days at a prison doing interviews there. So we now travel a lot more to do interviews, which is great. We go down to Southern California quite a bit to do interviews. And we hope once COVID is over, we'll be traveling around the country doing interviews. So that's that's one of the biggest changes since Earlonne got out, that we can travel together and do stories. Which we never, I mean, there was no way I was going to do that on my own when Earlonne was inside.
That's awesome.
No way. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, like, I think I'm always curious, what is that perception, to the guys on the inside? Like, are they like, yes, this is great, or no, I don't want to be part of that, or like, what is, against it, or, or if people are fairly open about, sharing their stories.
I mean, I think Earlonne could speak to that. When you were inside, what was your perception?
What was my perception? In what capacity? Let me think.
Like, was there any problem getting people to talk to us?
No, I think
Feel.
in the beginning, nobody knew what we were up to. So they didn't know how it would impact them. You know what I'm saying? They didn't know that ear hustle was the best thing since sliced bread. They didn't know that. They didn't understand that ear hustle was putting a face to the faceless. You know what I'm saying? So I think once, Nigel would say this a lot, where, it was actually the people, family members, that start telling them about ear hustle. Like, hey man, do they record ear hustle where you at? They say San Quentin, are you there with ear hustle? Do you know ear hustle? Do you know Nigel? Do you know Earlonne? Do you know? So you had that. And, one of the biggest issues I used to always have is getting the individuals who had been incarcerated over 30 years to get on the mic. You know what I'm saying? That was like one of the hardest tasks, because individuals used to be like, man, I don't talk to the media. We don't do no talking. We don't do no talking. So I used to have to figure out ways to engage them, and I used to sometimes get lucky because I had a way of talking to people. But I think that individuals, once they seen what we were into, once they seen we weren't there to be like, got you questions and all that, they were more open to what we were doing, because they knew we wasn't about got you. We were about just trying to do some cool stories, whether they were good, bad, ugly. We just want to make sure we got a good story that people can, listen to and maybe edutain.
Yeah, and one thing Earlonne always said to guys, which I loved, was don't be a statistic. Don't let other people tell your story. Like in ear hustle, you are going to be able to tell your story and take advantage of that. And I think, I think guys really listened to that.
No, definitely. Because I'll look at them and be like, bro, you're going to be a statistic. Nobody know who you are. They don't know your name. You've been here 30 some years. They didn't have internet. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have text message. You've been here when it was paper. It was newspaper, print. You know what I'm saying? So, it's hard for some people to step out of that zone that they've been in for so long. But, I think I was very convincing. Matter of fact, I was just hanging out with one of the guys tonight, Al King.
Oh, yeah.
He did not want to, he was one of them dudes, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. And, I used to be on him, bruh, just talk to us, man. Just like sit down and I was on the streets when I finally got him to talk to us for an episode dealing with cooking. Yep. He's a great cook in prison, and I think a lot of people should know that. Just the stories of how this man will watch every cooking show and try to recreate something from the only things you have in prison and do a damn good job at it. You know what I'm saying? So we finally was able to get him to give us a recipe.
And eventually gave us some nice baked goods too.
He gave us some nice, he gave us a recipe, came on the podcast. I'm not saying the podcast freedom or nothing, but he's on the streets now after 38 some years. So.
I was going to say, it's actually really nice to hear all the people who are free that have been on the podcast. And I'm almost like, are there people who are like, is this a little bit of a magic thing? Like, if I go on the podcast, am I?
Well, I'm the luckiest one of everyone, man. Miami, November 28th, November something, 2028 is when I'm supposed to go to my first parole board to be found suitable for parole.
Yeah.
And
So
instead you got out November.
November 30th of 2018,
Yeah.
10 years earlier.
And I always point out that's the date he was going up for parole. That doesn't mean he would have gotten out necessarily.
I could have got a 15-year denial.
Yeah. So
in 2028.
Yeah.
You know, I could have got a write-up right prior to that for disobeying a direct order. You know, I didn't want to strip search that day because I was going through something. You know, so you know what I'm saying? And that don't mean I would have got out. I could have got denied 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, 15 years. So
yeah,
that was just the date I was scheduled to appear.
yeah.
And now you were, you Pulitzer finalist, Peabody, nominated.
Yeah.
Like, it's so amazing, how it's grown. And I think it's just going to be super awesome to see where else it goes. I'm really excited to hear that, like, y'all will just keep doing interviews in different prisons, especially I know you mentioned wanting to hear more from women's prisons too.
Definitely.
And being able to do
Definitely.
all that
We
is
got
just like
in women
amazing.
prisons. We definitely in women
Yeah.
prisons. Nigel ain't gonna walk away from the table until we got a whole season of women.
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah. And then hopefully we'll be getting overseas too. So we've got a lot of plans for the future.
Oh, that's so cool. All right, and then I want to make sure we get to this question, since I know we'll need to be, y'all need to go soon, since you have an episode to
Got an
finish.
episode coming out tomorrow. Yep.
Somebody said they've been fascinated by all the stories on Ear Hustle. She says her husband spent a few years in the system, mostly at Mule Creek. And I talked to him about all that I hear on the podcast, and it sparks great conversation. I'd love to know if someone like me in the Bay Area could help people inside or outside. Recently, after the latest episodes, I found myself wanting to sort of sponsor someone coming out of prison without much support, even if it's to go shopping or figure out new technology, etc. And Earlonne said, hit him up.
Hit me up on social. No, I mean, I think it's always good when people want to engage, because that's what community service is. It don't matter if a person's in prison, a person homeless, person, whatever the case may be. Just figure out what it is that you want to do, how you want to assist, whether it's in your community, whether it's trying to figure out how you can effectually affect teachers being paid as much as correctional officers. That can be what people in your community do. Like, why are correctional officers being paid twice or sometimes 3 times the salary of teachers?
Yeah.
That's a good.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I mean, one of the things I always say to people who want to volunteer or do something, first of all, figure out what you have to offer. What are you interested in? What are your talents? What do you have to share? And what brings you some sense of joy? And then you apply that to where the need is, and you will find something to do. And she brought up reentry. I think reentry is, Earlonne, I wonder if you think of this. I think reentry is an area that needs so much help. People getting out of prison. Oh man.
Yeah, because I think one of the reentry things is, even though it's almost late in the game, is resume writing. One of the reentry things is trying to figure out how to get individuals their social security cards, even though this stuff shouldn't be reentry. This stuff should be like, as soon as you get out, you should have all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the hurdles that individuals go through. They don't have their birth certificate. They can't get their ID. They can't get their social security card.
Can't get the driver's license.
Yeah, the driver's license. So they stuck. Like, a lot of that stuff should be done before these individuals hit the streets.
Yeah.
You should have your ID. You should have your birth certificate. You should have your social security card. You should, DMV is nothing. So you should be able to take your written test in prison. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Before you get home. That way you have a jump on, acclimating back into society, instead of now you got to go through all this stuff again just to get there. And you don't have it. If you don't have a social security card, you can't get a job. So that means you don't have no income coming in. I mean, hopefully not the worst. You just go back, you give up, and you go back to what you would used to do. That's what you don't want.
Yeah, and I was wondering that too. Yeah, like how much is done before people leave, because you're like, one would hope, but it seems unlikely that all these things are done to help prepare people before they leave.
It goes back to the volunteers. The volunteers that come in with these specific type of groups, or it's about the incarcerated individuals that's been locked up a long time that actually created these type of groups that assist individuals in their reentry. And like, say for instance, if I created a group that my main mission was to bring outside influencers in to assist in getting individuals job interviews, getting individuals jobs, or just giving individuals the job, the questions or the skill set to even entertain a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? To run an individual through that. That's usually done by an incarcerated person or a volunteer. It's not by the system itself, no.
All right.
So
I know.
I would say volunteer. Get your volunteer on, whatever capacity. You can volunteer, and it's a beautiful world when people volunteer. It's a beautiful world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yeah, it is really amazing what Nigel you've been able to do, and I think you've still been doing. There's like a quote in the book that really hit me about how do we examine these things without being voyeuristic, and I think that is something that both what you've shown with the book and then what Ear Hustle has really been successful in avoiding is not doing it from a place of voyeurism and not doing it from a place of like saviorism, but just to be there for people.
To be there and finding the right colleague. I mean, Earlonne and I were really fortunate to find each other. In each other, we found really great professional partnership, and we couldn't do it without each other. This is we have there's a larger team than Earlonne and myself. This is a team effort, but we birthed this project along with Antoine Williams, our other co-creator. Mm-hmm. So it was brought from love and caring and respect. Yeah, so we're lucky. We're very lucky.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's magic, like it's some sort of.
Thank you. I like to think there's a little bit of magic for sure. Yeah.
Since you mentioned the cooking, when I was listening to the cook-off episode, I was like, "Ooh, there should be a cookbook. There should be also a cookbook that is, basically enterprising and taking materials, because sometimes you're looking at home and you don't have any materials, and you're like, how do I make something for myself? So that would actually be really awesome. So I'm just gonna put that out there.
Okay. Heard and noted.
But okay, so I really want to thank you for being here tonight. I know y'all have been super busy. Congratulations on this is San Quentin, on the San Quentin project, and then also this is Ear Hustle. Sorry, I'm mixing up.
This is Ear Hustle.
This is Ear Hustle, and for the San Quentin project, yeah, both amazing. Hopefully y'all can find it at the library, and you can also check your local indie bookstore. I believe y'all did some signing, signed some copies at Marcus Books. They're in Oakland, and
I always say your local bookstore. You know what I'm saying? Bookstores need to survive in some capacity. Definitely ask your local bookstore first before you go over to the big A.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate it. And as I mentioned to Nigel before, this is my last event with the library because I'm changing jobs. So it's just so wonderful. Thanks. It's wonderful to be ending with Nigel because she was also so amazing when she came to library earlier on in my career.
And Earlonne.
No, it's all Nigel here. This is all Nigel.
No, I'm so glad that
Earlonne. You got history. I just jumped in. I parachuted in this, but I'm just saying you got a history here. So
what was fun doing it?
Thank both of y'all for the work y'all been doing.
Well, my hope is still to meet y'all in person and more of the Ear Hustle team. So I'll be, following y'all.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.